Some of the coolest effects in Blender can be achieved through one of these systems, and these are physics properties. Physics properties try to recreate what we see in real life into 3D. The ones that are included in this list are force field, collision, cloth, dynamic paint, soft body, fluid, rigid body, and rigid body constraint. The first one is force field, which when applied creates a force around the object that can affect nearby particles or fluids. To show this better, I'm going to create a simple particle system that's right next to the force field. You can change things like the shape of it, from point to surface or curve. The strength, which when you put into negatives makes it attract, and when you put into positives, it makes it repel. Flow, which kind of controls the viscosity of it, if that makes any sense. Then you can change it so it only affects the rotation, location, or if you want, you can include both. The next setting that matters is the fall off, which affects the influence radius and how fast it loses influence. And that's basically it for force field. The next physics property is collision. The collision property gives the active object a collision boundary between things such as emitter particles, fluids, smokes, etc. In the settings of this, you can make it so that it kills the particles on contact. You can also change the damping, which then just makes it so that the particles don't bounce or whatever doesn't bounce. And friction just slows down anything that comes into contact with it. And that's basically it for the collision property. The next property is cloth. And for cloth, what I would suggest to start off with is to get an object, then subdivide it around 30 times. Then add in the cloth modifier. And if you would like to have some of the edges be pins, so basically they do not move and are not affected by the simulation, make a new vertex group and select those vertices. Then under shape, under pin group, add in that vertex group. Then if you press play, you should see your object move as if a cloth would. To get a more realistic and more defined cloth, create more subdivisions, but be wary as this will create more strain on your computer. The next property, and honestly one of my favorites, is dynamic paint. To start off with this, create a plane, then add in the dynamic paint property, then set it to a canvas. Then make an icosphere and give it the dynamic paint property, but this time set it to brush instead of canvas. Then make a new collection called brushes and put the icosphere under the brushes. Then select the canvas that you already made, and under surface, make the new collection the brush collection. Now in the top right, click on the arrow next to the render mode button, and then select attribute, or in older versions, vertex, under the color settings. Now if you move the icosphere along the plane, you should see it leave a trail behind of the color that you've set it at. Usually it would be blue, but you can change it to something else. Now that this is done, you can change the canvas type from paint to something else like displays, waves, or weight map. This is really cool as it works in real time and just makes a really cool effect. Some of the uses for this that I can see is a river or maybe footsteps into snow with displays, but you can just try this out for yourself, it's insanely cool. The next physics property is the soft body property. When applying this to a mesh, make sure you have a couple of subdivisions, but not too much to not ruin your computer. After you add in the soft body property, then if you add in a cube with the collision property, play the animation and drag the cube through the other cube, you should see the soft body work. And this can be made at a greater effect by just increasing the amount of vertices on the soft body. The next one is the fluid property. And to start off with this, I would just advise to use the quick smoke and quick liquid effects that Blender already has in place. To do this, press F3, then type in quick smoke or quick fluid, whichever one you want. Also make sure you have an active mesh when you select the quick smoke. Both fluid and smoke, you'll have to bake the animation, and to do this, under frame start and an offset, there will be a type, change that to modular, and then you should be able to bake the data. And if you want a mesh with the liquid, Then you can take the mesh box and then just click bake mesh. If you want to release the data, just click on free data, which should be around the panel. It's the same thing with smoke, but with smoke you don't actually have to make a mesh for it, as it'll just be a volumetric. The second to last physics property is the rigid body. To start off, there are two forms of rigid body. These are passive and active. Passive doesn't get affected by things like gravity and usually cannot move, and all it really does is acts as a collision boundary to other rigid bodies. Active, on the other hand, can be moved by things like gravity and other rigid bodies. To show this, I'm going to make a cube and a larger cube, but set the bottom larger cube to passive and the top one to active. You can see that there's a collision between the passive and active. Where this gets really fun is with other active rigid bodies. I'm just going to make a cube stack and then get another one and tick animated so I can move it across. You can now see that I'm able to knock over the tower using the other cube in which I ticked animated. This is really fun to just play around and to make some cool animations. The next one is the rigid body constraint, which I'll just showcase with two cubes that are also rigid bodies. Then make an empty. You can just use plain axis or whatever you want, just make sure it's an empty, and set the rigid body constraint to it. Then you can select the two cubes in the object 1 and 2 tabs. You can then set it to either be point, hinge, or one of the other settings, which help imitate real life things such as doors, springs, etc. If you want to use fluid simulations in your render, check out my video. I made that a while ago. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.